Hi, I'm Bonnie Barker with BonnieBayCrochet.com, and today we're going to talk about to swatch or not to swatch and what in the world is a gauge. Okay, those of you who have been around for crochet a long time understand these terms, but if you're brand new to crochet, you might be wondering, what in the world is that girl talking about? Well, I have a box to show you. I have an entire box of swatches that I have made over the many years of crochet, and let me show you some of these. Okay, just some little samples, and you probably think that one looks kind of odd. Well, that was actually a very helpful swatch. And here's another one, and I could go on and on and on. I have many different swatches. This is something that as a designer it's really important for me to do, especially if I'm making a garment, you know, such as a sweater or a hat or something that fits the human body, because it's very important that it be the size that I want it to be. And the only way that I can get to that point is to actually determine how many stitches are in a given inch or a centimeter or whatever measure that you're using. I need to know how many stitches across and how many stitches deep in terms of rows. Okay, so and by doing that, I know approximately how many stitches to begin with, and you know about how big the particular item will be when I'm all done. Okay, well, what does that have to do with you if you're not into designing? Well, actually, if you're going to read a pattern at any point, it's very important. But before we talk about that, let me tell you where it's not so important. Considering that you may have an endless yarn supply on hand. In other words, if you don't follow your gauge with some of these lesser important things that I'm going to mention, it's not going to be the end of the world as far as the size, because it's not going to matter so much, but it will matter if you run out of yarn. Okay, so in that sense, you still have to kind of pay a little bit of attention to the gauge. Okay, some of the items won't be a real big deal breaker if you don't follow the gauge would be, for example, in a bath mat. This is actually coming to my channel very soon. Okay, so the bath mat won't matter so much as long as you have enough yarn to finish the material. Whether it's an inch or two bigger or smaller, either way, it really isn't going to be a deal breaker. Okay, a scarf. Now, if you're making a scarf like this one, this is also on my channel, the width of it might vary if you don't follow the gauge, but this particular scarf, you stop crocheting it when you get to the length that you want. So in a sense, the gauge is not quite as important there either. Okay, how about a baby blanket? This is the Arrow baby blanket. The gauge, not so important, again, as long as you have enough yarn to complete your project, you'll be good. Now, things where it really does matter would be a hat, a headband that fits a particular size, definitely a sweater or even a poncho, things like that. It matters a little bit more. And so, well, let's go ahead and see, well, how do I find what my gauge is? Let's go ahead and look at that. Okay, I'm using a grid that I often use for different things. And after you've crocheted a swatch, what you can do is line it up on this grid. And what we're most interested in is counting how many stitches per a certain prescribed amount of space. So let's say a lot of patterns are dealing with how many stitches are in a 4-inch area. So if we look at this particular swatch, I'm going to put my hook here, and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and that's with the turning chain. So let's count. So that's about right. About 11 stitches there for 4 inches. Now, I didn't make enough rows to measure how many rows would be in 4 inches on this one, but I did on this other one. Well, let me just show you. So in this case, if we're going to count how many rows for 2 inches, which would be about here, and that would be approximately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows in 2 inches. So if I needed to know how many rows in 4 inches, I would just double that to a 12. Okay, maybe that's not quite so easy to see. Let me let me see, there's another piece. It's a little on the dark side as well, but this is obviously thicker yarn, and let's go ahead and just sit this down, and we can actually go over this part here if we wanted to. Okay, so let's see how many stitches are in a 4-inch from here to here. So I'm getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10. Okay. Now I did actually do more rows on this to see how many rows in a 4-inch area. And it's actually a little bit more than 4-inch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a little bit, well, maybe 4.5. Not even that. Oh, that's even hard to say. So sometimes, you know, this is really kind of hard to evaluate on the 4. And so sometimes you may want to even just take out a measuring device. I'll go ahead and put it so that you can see it. And do it this way and measure the stitches. And I do this a lot. Okay, so if I'm working this, so it's still, if I go a little bit above where the turning chain is, it does get closer to 4 inches. So it is within the ballpark to say 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say 5 rows on this one. But again, that's just a rough estimate. And here's, let's see, I'm going to do one more. I've got a bunch of these things. Okay, this is this one may look familiar to you. This is the arrow stitch, and I'm going to go ahead and stick that right there. Well, that works out really well. It's really, you know, it's a good day when these work out really evenly. I'm just showing you some of the ups and downs of this because this doesn't always come out totally perfectly, but you do want to be within a ballpark and within a good ballpark. So with this, we have really 1, 2, 3, 4 arrows in a 4-inch area. And if I move this down here, so that, because this first row is actually a single crochet, we actually do get 1, 2, 3, 4 arrow rows, which is actually 8 rows of crocheting in a 4-inch distance there. Okay, so by finding out how your stitches, how your swatches compare to what the designer is getting in the written pattern, that'll determine how close your project is going to be to that designer's. And just to let you know, you don't need a fancy board or anything like this. If you just have, you know, a simple tape measure, that's really all you're going to need. And just to go ahead and measure and just see what you get. So is it worth it to swatch? Absolutely. And one thing also that's really nice about swatching is you can determine if you like that particular fabric with, you know, the particular hook that you're using. Now, let's say you don't get the swatch that's or the gauge like you would like. Suppose it's much too small, it's smaller, and in that case you're going to want to bump up to a larger size crochet hook. Now if your gauge is too big, let's say you're getting 9 stitches per 4 inches and you're supposed to get 12 inches, your stitches are too big, then you need to go down to a smaller size hook. Always feel free to change the size of the hook at any point in order to meet gauge. There's nothing sacred about the hooks that we choose or the size. It's just the hook that we use to get our gauge for that particular project. One other thing you may want to do when you swatch before you make a project is put a little tag on your swatch and write down what size hook did you use. Write down the name of the yarn and maybe even what is in the fiber. Is it an acrylic? Is it a mohair wool acrylic blend? Don't depend on your memory to remember all these things. I've got a ton of things in this box right now and I thought I would be able to remember a lot of it, but honestly I don't. I can kind of figure it out by touching it, and I do remember some of the fibers, but a lot of times I don't remember the more subtle differences in them. Okay, and another thing that you might be worried about is, well, if I make a swatch, won't I run out of yarn for my project? Well, maybe not, but if you do happen to run out of yarn for your project and you need to undo the swatch, then just simply, undo the swatch and use that for your project. But if you don't, then you always have a record of that particular type of yarn and what you required to get gauge for the particular project. And also write on the card, write the gauge, 10 inches for every 4 inches across, maybe 5 rows equals 4 inches, something like that. Just write it on the card or the little tag. Doesn't have to be fancy, but just so that you have a record, so that when you make another project and you see what their gauge requirements are, you'll know whether you need to change or not. Or maybe you'll say, okay, well, that's the same gauge, so I don't even have to make a swatch, and I'll save me some time, yay. But anyway, swatching is really, really good. Another reason that I like to swatch is as a designer, I'm always coming up with, different ways to crochet cables and things. That's kind of my specialty right now. And I like to decide, well, what size hook am I going to use with the particular yarn to get the particular feel of the fabric. If you crochet something really, really tightly, the fabric is just real stiff and unyielding. And I prefer, a little bit of flexibility. And if it's, something that has a little bit of, drape to it, just kind of blesses me a little bit more than if it's, if it feels like a piece of cardboard. I don't really particularly like to crochet things that are stiff like that unless it's designed to be stiff, let's say for a hot pad for your counter to, keep your counters from being burned by the pots and things like that. But, well, anyway, I hope that's helpful. These are just some reasons why, yes, to swatch or not to swatch, I say yes. And hopefully you know what gauge is. Gauge, again, is just a measure of how many stitches per inch. There's so much more that I could say about swatches and gauge, and I probably have left you with more questions than answers on this, especially if you're a beginning crocheter. So if you have any questions and some things that you want me to respond to, please respond in the description box here. Just please put your questions there and I will answer them as promptly as I can. Well, I think that's it for now. If you like this video, if you could please just hit that little bell. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button because I don't want you to miss any of the fun videos that are coming your way. God bless. Bye-bye.